I'm on. All right, awesome. Good morning. If you would, open up your Bible, probably to Luke chapter 2. We're going to hang there most at the beginning, and get your Bible flipping hands ready, because we're going to be going back and forth quite a bit this morning from our Old to our New Testament. If you've seen the bulletin, you've already seen the subject is prophecy about Jesus. And with that is looking at the prophecy and then looking at it being fulfilled. So get your Bible flipping hands ready this morning. Before we get into the lesson, I want to make mention of two quick things. Number one is that the Youth Devo, well, I guess three really quick things. Number one is that Courtney and I are going to get to go on vacation. This is our first vacation in 5 years. It's kind of fun. We're going over to Florida. Hopefully it won't be too rainy. And so we're going to be gone Monday to Friday. And so we're going to be gone this week, but, and this is where the other two announcements come into play, the youth are still going to meet on Tuesday at Justin Hill's house. Still going to have a meal, still going to spend some time together, and Justin's going to have a short devotional thought for them on knowing who God is from looking at stories in the Bible. And then Friday night, which is when our activities are normally going to be, is the Friday night Devo. That's going to be the activity for this week and for everyone in the congregation. If you have known the Lewis family long, you know Friday night Devo means literally anyone who can come is welcomed. And if we have to put you on the stairs or make the kids sit on the floor, I can't tell you how many memories I have of seeing a family come in and going from my chair to the floor. And I mean, it's just always a great time on Friday nights to come worship God together, hear a devotional thought, and just spend some time eating snacks and talking about things until much later than normal. Anyway, so Friday night Devo for the youth, Tuesday night Devo at Justin Hill's house. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll get you all sorted out. All right, so this morning I want to begin with a question. When we talk about the prophecy about Jesus, I think a question that kind of begins this whole lesson comes to mind, and that's who do you follow? The idea of a follower has kind of taken on a new connotation lately. If you think about it, when I think of followers now, I mean, you used to think of like someone leading a movement, right? And a leader has followers, but now who has followers? Well, I can guarantee you where all the kids' minds are going. Instagram, like Twitter followers, right? That's kind of where our brains go when we think of followers now. You follow someone's life, you try and look like someone that you've seen on TV. We say someone's gained a following. We used to think that means that they're a leader. Now it just means they're good at their phone, and so it's kind of taken a different meaning. I want to go back to that original meaning because I think they're intertwined. See, what you look at regularly, what you're watching regularly, is going to have an effect on who you are and how you act. And so who you follow in the new sense of the word really is connected to who you would follow in the old sense of the word. So who are you following? Who is the leader? Who are you trying to emulate? And then the second question, why do you follow them? Not all leaders are created equal. Different leaders have different levels of credentials. Some are leaders because they're leaders. Let me explain. The Kardashians are famous for being famous. I mean, have you ever thought, like, what's remarkable about them? They're famous for being famous. George Washington was famous for leading troops in battle and famous for strategy and for bravery. See, not all leaders are created equal. Different credentials elevate different leaders above others. I believe we should follow Jesus because he's the greatest leader of all time. No one had a greater impact on the world than Jesus Christ. I remember a friend of mine was playing one of those history games where you create a civilization or whatever. And he said they try to be historically accurate. And I was like, really? It was set in the time of Jesus. And I said, what happens during, the first century? He says, well, it's not a religious game, But you see Rome and how they have happiness, it goes way down. I was like, that's really interesting. In a non-religious game, Jesus had an impact on history, so much so that they had to put his impact into that game. Thought that was pretty interesting. He showed up, and we even measure our time by him. One of the reasons he's such a great leader is because he came with credentials, right? Think about this. Jesus showed up with his credentials ready. Sometimes that happens here and there in smaller scale forms. Never like this. Never like this. A lot of times leaders kind of make their way. We just named, two examples of people who had a following: George Washington, the Kardashians. I mean, they had a beginning. George Washington was kind of a nobody at the beginning. We know some stories about him now because he was such a great leader that we went back and learned about him. But I mean, the kid chopping down a cherry tree, but nobody cared about him at the beginning, right? He had to do something to earn his credentials. Jesus didn't. He showed up with credentials in hand because they'd been prophesied about him hundreds of years before he got there. So here's what we're going to do, is we're going to look at some of these credentials that Jesus came with, and we're going to kind of do this I'm calling it a series. We're going to do 2 parts. Today we're going to look at the prophecy about Jesus, and then the next time we're going to do kind of a different version of the prophecy about Jesus, which should be really encouraging. So with that said, there are different kinds of predictions in the Bible. And when we hear the word prophecy, our mind immediately goes to one specific kind, and that's the foretelling. Anytime, and really that's kind of the way we use the word now. The prophet or prophecy is just someone speaking on behalf of God, right? It's the mouthpiece of God. That's not really how we use the word. We use it more so in the sense of someone who is telling the future, someone who is foretelling things that are to come. And that's not inaccurate. There are a ton of examples of prophecy being used in that way. And we're going to look at those specifically today. When I think of foretelling, one of the first things that comes to my mind, because I'm Mike Lewis's son, a Dallas Mavericks fan, and Joseph Lewis, is Jason Terry in 2011. Jason Terry was a basketball player for the Dallas Mavericks. At the beginning of the season in 2011, he went out and he got a tattoo of the championship trophy on his bicep before they played a game that year. Now, what you need to know about this is that they were not the favorites. They were not even in the top couple of favorites. They were going to be a good team, but no one thought they were going to win. This was the year LeBron went to Miami, for those of you that remember that. He got a tattoo. And then we won. And what did he do? He said, I told you, right? He said, I told you. Some of you guys may remember or know Tyler Anderson. Went to Louisville with us for a while. He did something similar. Before the season started, I believe it was the night before the first game, he wrote out a bracket, and he filled in this bracket with who was going to win the championship and how many games it was going to go. And would you believe it if I told you that he guessed the Mavericks would beat the Heat in 6 games? Because he did. And that's what happened. See, these guys, they kind of foretold what was going to happen. But here's the funny part of this, is the next year, Jason Terry got another tattoo of the championship trophy, and they didn't win. So, this was kind of a one-off for these guys. And really, it's interesting because they're only guessing 1 year in advance. My dad told me about a magazine a long time ago that used to have predictions in their first issue of the year, and they would make a couple hundred predictions for how the year would go and what would happen throughout this year, and they'd get a couple of them right. They'd have a couple, 2 for 100 or something like that. And it's interesting that they couldn't even get a winning percentage on this in 1 year's time span. Contrast that to prophecy about Jesus. It's much different. These prophecies that we're talking about today, they are specific foretellings by multiple different authors over the hundreds of years before Jesus came to earth. All right, these are specific. What do we mean by specific? We mean not he rode a horse. We mean he rode a donkey into Jerusalem claiming to be the Messiah, right? We mean specific prophecies by multiple authors. Well, it's believed that the Old Testament is written with roughly 40 different authors, 40 different men are writing the Old Testament, and a number of them do write prophecy about Jesus. Not just one guy making a bunch of guesses, but several different people whose guesses don't overlap or contradict one another. And then lastly, these prophecies took place all well before Jesus came to the earth, somewhere between 1,500 years before Christ and up to 400 years before Christ. This is 400 years. I'm going to make a guess now that in the year 2420, this is going to happen. I mean, that's crazy. None of us are even going to be here to see if it happens. And yet those are the kind of prophecies that we have in the pages of Scripture. So we're going to look at 8 of them today. We're going to look at 8. We're going to make a little bit of an application, and then the lesson will be yours. We're going to start with some prophecies about Jesus's birth. Keep your hand in Luke chapter 2 and look back at Micah chapter 5. Micah chapter 5. If you have to sing the song, that's okay. I probably did too. Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. It says, "But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient of days." A couple of pieces that are important here. Number one, O Bethlehem. We got a place. All right. Number two, what's going to happen in that place? One who is of old will come from Bethlehem in that place. Flip over to Luke chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. It says, "In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quintus was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in a swaddling cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them at the inn." All right. He's going to be born from Bethlehem. He is born in Bethlehem. But think about how crazy this was. I mean, this wasn't just, he grew up, he lived there. That was where he was from. Think about all the things that had to happen for this to be fulfilled. Well, it had to happen. It says that Joseph wasn't living in Bethlehem at the time with Mary. It says it was the time of the registration. And they had to go be registered. So it had to fall in that time. Joseph also had to be a law-abiding citizen. Like, he had to say, I know this is going to be an expensive trip, but I'm going to go anyway. Joseph also had to earlier not choose to put Mary away as he was going to when he found out that she was pregnant. So a lot of things had to take place for this to happen exactly the way it was prophesied about hundreds of years prior. Let's look at the second one. Number 2, the Messiah will be born of a virgin. Look at Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7. Verse 14. It says, Isaiah 7, verse 14. "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." All right. Really simple. Really simple. How are we going to know this is the Messiah? It says, there will be a sign. The virgin will conceive and bear a child. Okay? Luke chapter 1 and verse 31. It says, let's begin in verse 30. "And the angel said to her, 'Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son. And you shall call his name Jesus, and he will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end.'" So here it is. It said it. It happened. You're going to see this pattern a couple more times. It said, this will be the sign, right? Look at the very next verse. And Mary said to the angel, how will this be, since I am a virgin? All right. Take a second and understand that Mary was a Jew. She knew the law. If she had been thinking, right, she might have been able to recall this passage that's being referenced back in Isaiah chapter 7. She might have been able to remember that because she had been taught this. They had read this. They knew this stuff. And yet it's so crazy that this is going to be fulfilled that she doesn't even believe it. How is this going to happen? I'm not married. I haven't been married. I haven't gotten to do any of the things that married people are allowed to do. I'm a virgin. How does this happen? It happened because God told us that it was going to happen, and he accomplishes his will. And so Mary gives birth to Jesus while being a virgin, which is again a miracle and a prophecy that we saw made hundreds of years before Jesus came to the earth. Number 3, the Messiah would be from Abraham, Jacob, and David. Y'all know those carnival games? You know the carnival games where you have to climb up? It's got like a ladder, and if you can get up to the top of the ladder and ring the bell, you get a prize. You know what I'm talking about? And you see people wobble and they flop over, and it's fun to watch, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, just search carnival games. Mark Rober has a cool video on it. You have to climb up the ladder, and the ladder is attached at one point on each end, and so it becomes almost impossible to keep your way up. One of the tricks that they tell you is have 3 points of contact at all times, right? Never lose your points of contact, or else you'll flip over and fall onto the ground, and you won't win your prize. Well, apparently the biblical authors knew that before they did, and they gave us 3 points of contact here. Look back at Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22 and verse 18. Oh, goodness, my pages are sticking together. 22 and verse 18. It says, and in your offspring, this is the angel of the Lord speaking to Abraham, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. All right. So Abraham's offspring is going to bless the entire world. Again, a lot of these prophecies are a lot easier to see with hindsight. And so we know this is talking about Jesus. Abraham, point of contact number 1. Look at Numbers chapter 24. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17. It says, you shall bring from your dwelling places 2 loaves. Oh, this isn't it. Well. Oh, I'm reading Leviticus. Goodness gracious. I apologize. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17. I guess I should trust my writing. I wrote it down correctly. I read it wrong. 24 and verse 17. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. So here we go. Another prophecy about one who is to come from Jacob. Point of contact number 2. And the third one, hopefully written down correctly, Jeremiah chapter 23. Jeremiah chapter 23. And verse 5. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king, and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. All right. So here we have again this image of one who is to come, who is going to bring deliverance, who is going to bless the whole world, who is going to be king from the line of Abraham, from the line of Jacob, from the line of David. We got 3 points of contact here. Look at Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1, which is, I don't know if you guys are this way, but it's the part of the Bible that we read through the fastest because it's the hardest to pronounce. Matthew chapter 1 is the genealogy of Jesus. Right off the bat, Matthew says, hey, remember those points of contact that we knew the Messiah was going to come from? Here they are. Verse 1 and 2, it begins the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Skip on down to verse 5. It says, and Solomon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and so on. It continues all the way down until we come to Jesus. So here we have it. It was prophesied about, as far back as Abraham, which is potentially 2,000 years before Jesus was born. This was prophesied about. And then Jacob, and then Abraham. We have points of contact and references to Jesus' birth. And this one is really interesting. I know genealogies sometimes get, your eyes kind of glaze over and they're a little difficult and they have weird names. But this one's really interesting for this particular reason. This makes Jesus' coming to earth even more time specific. In AD 70, we know that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. And so what was destroyed with that were the genealogies, right? A lot of genealogies were destroyed when the temple was destroyed in AD 70. And so Jesus would have really needed to come before then to really solidify his lineage so that they could have a record, so that they could trace back that this really was true. So Jesus not only came from the right place in Bethlehem, but he also came at the exact right time so that they could verify some more of these prophecies that were made about him. Two quick ones about the life of Jesus. So there's three about his birth, two of them about the life of Jesus. Look at Psalm 78, verse 1 and 2. Psalm chapter 78, verse 1 and 2. Normally when you're preaching, you have bookmarks in your Bible. But if I had bookmarks in this for today's lesson, I think I'd just be fumbling over them too much. Psalm chapter 78 and verse 1 and 2. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old. Of course, this is telling us how Jesus would teach. He was going to teach in parables and stories. And if you look at Matthew chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, it says, all these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. And this was to fill what was spoken by the prophet. And then they reference Psalm chapter 78 that we just read. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundations of the world. So again, not only is he going to be born when and where and how, but he's going to do what was prophesied he would do. Another one with Jesus's life is that he would heal many. Isaiah chapter 35 and verse 5. And we go to Isaiah chapter 53 so frequently. Last time I was talking to somebody about this, that was where I referenced, and it was wrong. Isaiah chapter 35 and verse 5 says that it says, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. So Isaiah is writing here and he's saying, listen, people who are disabled in any way will be healed. That's going to happen when this Messiah comes. And again, flip to Luke chapter 7. You guys are going to have carpal tunnel after this. Luke chapter 7 and verse 18. It says, the disciples of John reported all these things to him, and John, calling two of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? And when the men had come to him, they said, John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, are you the one who is to come, or shall we wait for another? In that hour, he, being Jesus, healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits, and on many who were blind he bestowed sight. And he answered them, go tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Now, this is so cool because it says he's going to heal people. And then with some of the exact same phrases, if you remember the man who was lowered through the roof, it says he leapt away, praising God, right? Some of the exact same phrases that were prophesied about is how they were taken down in the account of Jesus' life. The deaf will be able to hear. The blind will be able to see. The lame will be able to leap like a deer. And then we have the account. Jesus did exactly these same things. All right, so we've got 5 of them. We're going to move through these last 3 a little quicker. We got 5 of these about 3 about Jesus's birth, 2 about his life, and then we've got 3 specific prophecies written by multiple different authors, hundreds of years before they happened, prophecies about the death of Jesus. This one is almost like cheating. We could have had 5 or 10 from this one passage, but look at Psalm chapter 22. Look at Psalm chapter 22, and we're not going to have time to go through the whole chapter, so if you want a fun study for another time, read through this chapter about Jesus. Psalm chapter 22, verse 7 and 8 say, "All who seek me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him." And then skip on down to verse 14. It says, "I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaw. You lay me in the dust of death." Verse 16 as well. "For dogs encompass me, and many evildoers encircle me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me, and they divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots." Now, this is probably not as clear to the people that were reading it when it was written. It might be really obvious to us, and that's a little bit unfair because we have the benefit of hindsight, but this seems to be clearly talking about crucifixion, right? I mean, just a couple of things. My bones are out of joint. They have pierced my hands and my feet. They stare at me and gloat over me. Now, maybe they didn't know what this was when it was written. And that is really fair because at the time of this writing, this was written roughly 1000 BC-ish. Crucifixion didn't even become invented until 300 BC. I remember, count backwards, right? Because BC. So there was a roughly 600 year gap between when this was written and when the Roman crucifixion was invented. Let me clarify this a little bit. Imagine someone in the 1700s saying someday to treat cancer, they're going to do chemotherapy and radiation. And they're going to have to be hooked up to an IV, and there are going to be these side effects. Imagine someone trying to explain that in the 1700s. It wouldn't make any sense. They'd be very confused. But if we went back and we read that, we'd say, what in the world? How did this guy know about chemo, right? It would be amazing. It would be evidence that something outside of him had to be at work here. This is the same idea. 600 years before the idea of hanging someone on a cross and publicly executing them was thought of by the Romans, this description of Jesus' death was written down. Nails in the hands and the feet, raised up for people to stare at, and his bones out of joint. If you know about crucifixion, you know that was a common thing where people's shoulders and their bones would come out of joint by hanging on the cross. So this is honestly incredible. And we know Matthew chapter 27 and verse 41 through 44. We read the account of Jesus being crucified up on the cross. It says, 2 men will be grinding at the mill. Good grief. 24. If I could just read the right verse on the first try, this would be so much smoother. Matthew chapter 27, 41 through 44. It reads, so also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now if he desires him, for he said, I am the Son of God. Now, what did we just read in Psalm 22? What were they going to say? I mean, Psalm 22 directly quotes these guys before they said it. What do you even call that? What do you call that when someone quotes you before you say something? You call it prophecy, I guess. So in verse 7 and 8, it says that he trusts in verse 8, he trusts in the Lord, let him deliver him. You know what's so funny about this too? These were Jews who knew this scripture and they still said this stuff, right? Like if they didn't want Jesus to be the Messiah, don't you think they wouldn't want to quote the Bible when they were talking about him? Listen, the Bible said it. It came true. This is how prophecy about Jesus works. And like I said, we don't have time to look at all of them, but the fact that it says in Psalm 22 that I can count all of my bones, during crucifixion, they typically went a long, long time because people would pull themselves up to get a breath. And so what they would do to speed up the dying process is they would break the tibia and fibia of the people being crucified. Very, very common because these would take a long time. When they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead and they didn't need to break any bones. That is weird in the context of crucifixion. We don't have time to look at all of this, but Psalm 22, if you want on your own sometime, go look at some of these incredible parallels. Another one in Psalm 22, which is our seventh one, is that they cast lots for his clothes. We read in verse 18, for my garments they cast lots. And then Matthew 27, in verse 35, it says exactly the same. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. The Bible prophesied about it hundreds of years before. It came true exactly the way it was said to. Last one. Jesus died with criminals and was buried with the rich, which is an incredibly specific way of saying someone's going to die, right? Why would you have to specify that weird detail that he's going to die with criminals and be buried with the rich man? This is prophesied about in Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah 53 and verse 9. It says, and they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Flip over to Matthew 27, verse 38. It says that then two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. Skip down to verse 57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. Died with criminals, buried with the rich. Just exactly the way it was prophesied about. Now, let's take a breath. That was 8 points. That's a long lesson. Just a couple quick things to wrap us up. There's a guy whose name was Peter Stoner, which is a cool name because Peter means rock. Peter Stoner, he was a chairman of math and astronomy at Pasadena College, and he was very interested in prophecy. And so he took about 600 of his students, and they gathered up 8 prophecies. This is why we looked at 8 specific prophecies today. They gathered up 8 prophecies, and they said, what is the likelihood that someone could fulfill all of these? Using math, using statistics. What are the chances, right? What are the odds that this actually happens? Well, they gave very conservative estimates. Very conservative. For example, one of the estimates that they gave for Jesus riding in on a donkey proclaiming to be the Messiah, right? They gave that a 1 in 100 estimate, which is a really, really generous guess, right? 1 in 100 that someone's going to do that. That's a really generous estimate. So that was the kind of generosity they gave to some of these estimates and how likely they were to happen. And they did the math and they decided that this is exactly what they said. The prospect that anyone would satisfy those 8 prophecies was 1 in 10 to the 17th power. Now, I know that as Americans, we're not great with numbers. It's evidenced by our national debt in the trillions. And he gave a better example of this, okay? He said, if you covered the state of Texas with silver dollars, 2 feet deep, the whole state 2 feet deep, gave someone a car and said, drive around wherever you'd like and pick up one of these silver dollars. If it has a dot on it, you win. That's the chances that Jesus fulfills 8 prophecies. Those are the odds. You understand that? Do you know how many prophecies there are about Jesus in the Bible? Over 300. Some scholars estimate well over 300. Depending on how you count them exactly. So just for kicks and giggles, Professor Stoner said, well, what would the number be if we just went with 40? That's a cool biblical number, right? What if we just went with 40 prophecies that Jesus had to fulfill? What are the chances? And he said that it would be 1 and 10 to the 157th power. I can't even tell you what number that is. I don't even know how many zeros that is. That is an enormous number. And that is 40 out of 300. This is what's so incredible about this. Jesus went 300 for 300. He checked every box. We can look through the Old Testament, find a prophecy, and we will find it fulfilled in the New Testament, with the exception of some that are still to come, such as the return of Christ. That we're still waiting for. This is what's so incredible about this, is different men didn't overlap their prophecies and contradict one another. They spanned between 1,500 and 400 years before Jesus was even on this earth, and they went 300 for 300. Remember that book, that magazine that I told you about, went 2 for 100? That was a successful year. They got a couple of them right. That's good, right? 300 for 300. This screams divine intervention. This doesn't happen without God intervening. This screams reliable document. This screams God's plan. So lastly, why are we spending so much time looking at this? I know it can seem kind of redundant the way we went over so many of them, but I believe there are 3 things that we'll quickly look at that are really important as we study this prophecy about Jesus. Number 1, I believe these are incredibly faith building. Hebrews 11:1 describes faith as substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. I didn't see Jesus, believe it or not. I didn't. I wasn't there to see him raised. I didn't see him be born in Bethlehem. I wasn't there to watch the nails go through his hands. I didn't see it. Faith says, the Bible describes faith as the evidence of things unseen. That's exactly what we're looking at right here. We have biblical evidence of things that we were not privileged to see. That's faith building. These accounts can help build our faith that God had a plan, that he knew this was coming. Secondly, I believe this can be an evangelistic tool. We can use this in outreach. If it can build your faith, it can build someone else's, right? I mean, that's just logical. But even better, we can use these, if you thought they were as cool as I did, we can use these evangelistically. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that word. That it doesn't have to be a big scary word. Evangelism doesn't have to be sit down one-on-one intense Bible study with somebody. It could be as simple as, did you know that that crucifixion was prophesied about 600 years before it came true? I mean, you could share it like you're sharing a fun fact, because you know what that does? It opens the door for somebody to ask another question. It shows somebody that you care about this. Just like when you talk about sports, it shows them you care about sports. It could be as simple as, you will never believe what I learned on Sunday. It doesn't have to be big and scary, but this can be used to strengthen the faith of people who are not Christians yet. And it can open doors and give more opportunity to questions. And number 3, I believe studying this is important because it teaches us about God and who he is. One of the things we're looking at in our Tuesday devotionals with the youth is learning about who God is from the stories that he's told us. Because the Bible is a story about God first and people second, right? The story, we can learn about God from what he did through Moses. Moses isn't the main character. God is. And so when we look at these prophecies, it can do the same thing. It can teach us a bit about who God is, how God thinks. I know I've caught myself this year saying, man, I can't believe 2020. The whole year is going to be a bad year. Like, I've had a couple bad weeks. I've had a bad month. But the whole year, they're probably going to cancel Christmas. I mean, you know, it's been a whole year. And in my mind, that feels like such a long time to be in a tough place. God doesn't think this way. He doesn't think year by year like we do. He thinks millennia by millennia, right? He literally had plans for exactly how Jesus was going to come to the earth. A thousand years before Jesus came. And if you go all the way back to Adam and the shall crush his head and shall bruise his heel prophecy about Jesus, we're looking at thousands of years before Jesus came to earth. God thinks differently than we do. He's looking at the big picture much differently than we are able to look at the big picture. And that should be incredibly faith building because it means that God has a plan, that God is in control. He's not rattled by 2020. 2020 didn't shake God, right? Because he looks at things in a much different way than we do. His ways are not our ways, and his thoughts, they're not our thoughts. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8 says the day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like one day. Maybe this is exactly what Peter was talking about. God thinks differently than we do. He's not worried about a couple years here. He's worried about the souls and eternity of his children. I believe that's incredibly faith building. Last thing I want to do is get back to that first question we asked at the beginning. Who are you following? What credentials do they have, the person that you're following? Because Jesus has 300 out of, he's got a perfect score on prophecy being fulfilled. He has all the credentials you could ever want in a leader. And so the question today, what I hope you can say is that I follow Jesus, the one who was prophesied about, the one who came, who died, who was raised from the dead, and who showed himself to many. I hope you can say that he's the one I'm following. If you can't say that, why not? If you used to say that, but you realize I probably can't say that honestly anymore, why not? He's the greatest leader of all time. And if you want to follow Jesus as we have every Sunday, now is an opportunity, an invitation. That's what it actually is. Like a written invitation to a wedding, here's an invitation to come be a part of the greatest joining together of forces, God, Jesus, and man. Here's the invitation to take part in the gospel. If you have need of the congregation in that way or in any other way, we can help you if you'll come forward while we stand and sing.
Sweet.